I'm going to tell you exactly what happened to me and my girlfriend last year, when we decided to spend a weekend out of the city. At that time, I was living in Des Moines, Iowa, and we were looking for a cheap, isolated place to relax, because I had just come off a brutal work week and only wanted to get away from noise. We found a small rental house in a simple listing, in a rural area near Ames, surrounded by tall cornfields, the kind where you can't even see where they end. It seemed quiet and safe, and the owner said it was common for people to rent it just to relax for a few days. We arrived on a Friday afternoon and everything seemed normal. Cool weather, the smell of damp soil, and the sound of corn shifting with the wind. The house was small, with a narrow porch and a weak, yellowish outdoor light. We spent the rest of the afternoon unpacking, making a simple dinner and trying to enjoy the silence. I remember telling her how strange that total silence felt, because any sound stood out sharply. When it got fully dark, around 8:30, we went to the living room to watch something on the laptop. The big living room window faced the cornfield, and we could see only the first row of plants. The rest turned into total darkness. The first time I heard the sound coming from there, something like steps pushing through dry leaves, I thought it was just an animal. But the sound stopped every time I moved close to the window, and that already made me uneasy. The sound came back a few minutes later, more rhythmic, as if someone were moving slowly between the rows, pushing the plants aside with their body. It wasn't like the wind, which is steady and soft. It was heavier, irregular, like footsteps. I even opened the front door to listen better, but as soon as the porch light turned on automatically, the noise stopped again. I stood there looking into the darkness of the cornfield, trying to pick out any movement. The air was cold and damp, and you could smell the strong scent of corn and soil. I went back inside feeling a little embarrassed because my girlfriend noticed I was tense, but I told her it was probably just a deer or a raccoon. Even as I said it, I didn't really believe it. We tried to ignore it and went back to the movie, but the noise came again a bit closer. This time my girlfriend heard it too and paused the video instantly. She asked if it was normal for animals to come that close to the house, and I told her it probably was. But honestly, I had never heard anything like that. The noise seemed to move toward the porch every time the light shut off on its own, almost like the presence of light kept it away. We spent several minutes just listening, realizing there was a pattern. Light turns on, total silence, light turns off, noise returns closer. I even tried turning the light on and off manually, and that made my girlfriend ask me to stop because it was making everything feel even worse. After a while, we went back to the living room because the window there gave a partial view of the cornfield, mostly through reflection from the dim indoor light. The room was dimmer, which made the glass act almost like a mirror. When we walked past the window, I saw something that made me freeze. A silhouette standing between the rows, completely still. I couldn't see a face or clothing, just the dark shape of someone standing upright. I called my girlfriend over softly and she saw it too. But when I opened the front door to get a direct look, the porch light turned on, and there was nothing there. Only the still cornfield and the faint wind moving a few leaves. The window reflection showed something, but directly outside there was nothing. That unnerved us both. We quickly closed the door, and my girlfriend suggested we lock everything and go straight to the bedroom, because we were getting too scared to pretend it was just an animal. I agreed, but I stayed a few more seconds watching the reflection on the window, trying to understand how something could appear there without actually being outside. We went turning off lights one by one, and every time a light went out, the cornfield noise seemed to shift position. Not like quick steps, more like someone dragging their feet through dry leaves, always getting closer when it got darker. When we reached the bedroom, I closed the curtains automatically, but even through them, it felt like someone was standing outside. We tried watching something on the phone to distract ourselves, but neither of us could focus. The sound kept coming and going, sometimes farther, sometimes so close it felt like whoever or whatever it was circling the house. I kept trying to come up with a logical explanation, because it was either that or panic. I thought maybe some neighbor was playing a prank, but it didn't make sense for anyone to walk around in a cornfield at night like that. Then I thought maybe it was a large animal, but the footsteps were too deliberate, and there were no heavy breathing sounds or scratching, just that slow, dragging movement. My girlfriend said she was getting stomach pains from how scared she was, and that only made me even more tense. Around 3 in the morning, the noise became louder, right next to our bedroom window. I could literally feel the mattress vibrate a little when my girlfriend grabbed my arm and whispered that she had heard something touch the wall. It wasn't knocking. It was more like someone slowly running a hand along the outside wall. I froze completely. I held my breath, waiting for something else to happen, but after a few seconds, the sound stopped. We couldn't tell if the thing had left or was just standing still. Not knowing was far worse than any noise. I eventually got up slowly, trembling, because I needed to at least check the living room to see if things looked normal. When I walked down the hallway, I felt the cold floor and realized the house itself felt colder, like air was coming in from somewhere. I turned off the phone screen so it wouldn't reflect on the window and approached very slowly. Before looking directly, I checked the decorative mirror on the wall beside the window, and that's when my legs almost gave out. In the reflection of the window, I could see a silhouette standing in the cornfield just like before, except now it was closer. I couldn't identify a face or clothes, just the shape of someone standing there, motionless. When I turned to look directly out the window, nothing was there. Absolutely nothing. The porch light illuminated a portion of the rows and the rest was pitch black, but nobody was there. I stood there trying to understand how that was possible. Maybe my reflection tricked me, but I knew it hadn't. The silhouette had been exactly where the leaves had moved earlier. My girlfriend appeared in the living room doorway asking what I was looking at, and I didn't want to scare her even more, but she could tell immediately something was wrong from my face. I just said, "There's someone out there." She went back to the bedroom almost crying. I turned off the porch light trying to see if anything moved in the darkness, and the sound came back instantly closer. The moment the sound returned, it wasn't distant like before. It was right next to the fence, like someone dragging their feet slowly, pushing dry leaves closer and closer to the house. I stayed at the window, too scared to open the door because every part of me knew that would be a terrible idea. The sound came, paused, came again, always the same rhythm. I tried using my phone's flashlight against the glass, and that's when I noticed something even worse. Even with the light on, no shadow appeared. Nothing moved between the rows. It was as if the sound existed without a person. Or they were far better hidden than I imagined. I went back to the bedroom slowly, because I didn't want to stay alone in the living room. We spent the rest of the night half awake. Every time the sound got louder, she squeezed my hand like she was trying not to cry. At one point, I heard something touch the bedroom wall again, like a hand brushing the outside, and that left me completely frozen. I thought about calling the owner, but it was so late I didn't even know what I would say. "There's someone walking in your cornfield." It sounded ridiculous, except it was happening. The only thing that made us feel slightly less terrified was hearing the noise gradually fade away, like it was moving farther. When I realized it had stopped, I checked my phone. It was almost 5:30. It was still dark, but the house felt less suffocating. When the sun finally started to rise, the first thing I did was look out the living room window. I just wanted to confirm nothing had happened, that we had overreacted because we were in an isolated place. But the morning light made everything worse. Behind the house, right next to the wall where we had heard the touch during the night, the plants were bent in a nearly perfect circle, as if someone had pressed everything down carefully. It wasn't something the wind could do, and it didn't look like an animal mark either. The rows were uniform, pressed down the same way. When we went outside to look closely, the smell of damp earth was strong and we could see tracks around the area, like someone had walked circles around the spot repeatedly. What really unsettled me was realizing the flattened path in the cornfield came straight toward the house and ended exactly below our bedroom window. There were no tracks going away, no path back. It was like whoever had been there had come all the way to the house, circled it, stopped at the one place where we were most vulnerable, and then vanished. My girlfriend went pale when she noticed and insisted we leave before the owner came for checkout. I didn't argue. We packed our things almost running. Story 2. I've been working as a truck driver for a few years now. I live in Albuquerque, but I spend most of the week driving through rural New Mexico and Texas. The night this happened, I was heading back from a long delivery toward Las Cruces. It was almost 2 in the morning and I had that heavy, exhausted feeling. eyes burning from the dry wind and the constant highway lights. I stopped at a rest area I'd used a few times before, one of those very simple ones with outdoor bathrooms and only 2 working light poles. The place was practically empty, just a small car parked in the far corner with no one around. Since I'd had way too much coffee, I decided to run to the restroom before getting back on the road. As soon as I stepped into the stall, I caught that typical highway restroom smell, cheap disinfectant mixed with dust. I shut the door and heard a very faint noise coming from the stall next to mine, like short, controlled breathing. I didn't pay much attention at first, since it could have been another driver trying to rest. But as the silence grew heavier, I started to realize that the breathing never changed rhythm. It was always the same, very low, very steady, as if someone was trying not to make any sound. When I went to leave, I bent down to grab the handle, and through the gap between the door and the floor, I saw a pair of boots standing perfectly still, pointed directly at my door, as if someone were waiting for me to open it. When I saw those boots standing there like that, my stomach tightened instantly. It made no sense for someone to be that close to another stall's door, especially in a place that empty at that hour. I froze with my hand on the handle, trying to hear any sign of movement, footsteps, fabric shifting, anything. But I didn't hear a thing besides that low breathing, which seemed to be coming from the exact direction of the boots. For a moment, I considered saying something, asking if the person was okay, but my voice wouldn't come out. I stayed crouched there, staring at that gap like it would somehow tell me something useful, but it only made things worse. After a few seconds that felt like minutes, the boots started to turn to the side. There was no sound of soles scraping, no creak of a body shifting, nothing. They just turned, very slowly, like they were gliding on their own. I didn't move an inch. My whole back went cold. I tried to control my breathing so I wouldn't make a noise, and the more I tried, the quieter the whole stall seemed to get. When I realized the person, or whatever it was no longer facing me, I took a deep breath and decided to get out as fast as I could. I swung the door open in one motion and nearly stumbled down the little ramp, looking both ways to see who had been there. No one. The stall next to mine was open and empty. Outside there was nothing but silence, only the wind hitting the metal signs. I practically ran back to my truck. The feeling of being watched was so strong that I kept looking over my shoulder, even though I heard nothing but the wind. When I finally climbed into the cab and slammed the door, I locked everything automatically, like my hands already knew what to do before I even thought. I sat behind the wheel trying to steady my breathing, but my heart was pounding in a way I couldn't hide. I stayed there for a few seconds, lit only by the dashboard, trying to understand what had just happened in the restroom. The idea that someone had been waiting outside the door without making a single sound made everything worse. When I started the truck and turned on the high beams to look around, I didn't see anyone. No movement near the bathrooms. No unfamiliar vehicle in the parking lot besides that same sedan that had been there earlier sitting in the corner. Then when I turned to adjust the passenger side mirror, I noticed something that made my throat close. There were fresh handprints on the passenger door window. Clear handprints, as if someone had pressed both hands against the glass just seconds earlier. The shape of the fingers was still sharp, shining under the interior light. I hadn't seen anyone approach the truck, and from where I was parked, anyone nearby would have been in my line of sight when I ran back. The first thing I did was hit the button for the side camera, the one connected to the mirror that records any movement near the door. I wanted to see anything. A shadow, someone running off, even a large animal would have been a relief at that point. But when the image came up, it showed only the parked truck and the empty space around it. I rewound the footage a few hours. Nothing. No figure, no sound of someone approaching, no change in lighting, like no one had ever been near the glass. Which made no sense at all because the handprints were right there, clear as day, like they'd been left seconds earlier. I even touched the inside of the door to check if it was some kind of reflection, but it wasn't. They were real handprints from someone who had been standing there. I stared at them for a few minutes, not knowing what to do. I didn't want to get out again, didn't want to check the bathroom, and the idea of sitting there waiting for something to happen felt even worse. I turned the high beams on again and scanned the entire parking lot, trying to find anyone at all. But the place was completely empty, eerily empty. The wind kicked dust against the side of the truck, making a dry tapping sound, and every time I heard it, my body tensed, thinking someone was touching the vehicle. In the end, I shifted into gear and drove out of there without thinking twice, hands shaking on the wheel for several miles. I didn't look in the rearview mirror for a long time. Honestly, to this day, I don't know who or what was outside that door that night, but I know I wasn't alone at that rest stop. Story 3. I was traveling alone through Arkansas for an education conference, something I did every year. I'm a teacher in Little Rock, and to save money, I usually stay in roadside motels when I don't need anything fancy. That night, I arrived extremely tired after driving for hours. The motel was simple, outside corridor, old carpet, that smell of a room that's been shut for days. I got room 207, right in the middle of the corridor. Since I was only going to sleep and leave early in the morning, I didn't care much about how the place looked. I set my bag in the corner, took a shower, and tried to sleep, even with the distant sound of the highway behind the building. It was around 2 in the morning when I woke up without understanding why. The corridor was silent, no footsteps, no doors closing. But after a few seconds, I heard a soft sound, like a door scraping against the frame. I thought it was someone arriving late, but the noise came again 2 minutes later. The same thing, a slow, almost careful push. I got out of bed, walked to the door, and looked through the peephole. The room directly in front of mine, 208, had its door cracked open about 5 centimeters. I could see part of the frame and an arm extended, the hand flat against the door, pushing it slowly as if someone were testing the limit of how far it could open. Just the arm. No part of the body appeared from my angle. When I realized I could only see the arm and not the rest of the person, a cold shiver ran up my spine. I stood there trying to understand the angle, whether the body was actually out of my line of sight or if the person was hiding behind the door itself. Even so, I didn't hear breathing, didn't hear shifting, nothing. Just that slow, repeated push that made the door open a little and then almost close again, always with the same rhythm. I stared for a few seconds without blinking, trying to catch any movement beyond that still arm. Nothing. It was as if it were stuck there, extended, lifeless, yet somehow pushing the door the same way. I went back inside and slid the security chain into place. I sat at the edge of the bed, heart racing, trying to find a logical explanation. I thought someone might be drunk and confusing the rooms. Or maybe it was just a guest struggling with the lock. But the repetition, always the same interval. None of it made any sense. 2 minutes later, the sound returned. I got up again, my hand sweating, and looked through the peephole. The arm was still there, but now the hand looked a little more open, as if pressing with more force. The door still didn't open fully, just enough to see the frame and that pale hand, frozen in a position no one would naturally hold. I started paying closer attention to the sounds, trying to detect anything that might indicate movement inside room 208. But there was nothing. No footsteps, no floor creaks, nothing dragging. Just that door opening a few centimeters and then closing slowly, as if someone were pushing carefully to avoid making too much noise. I pressed my ear against my door to try to hear breathing, but it was complete silence. What made me even more nervous was that from the peephole's angle, the arm never seemed to change position. It was always extended, always at the same height, and the door was what moved around it. At some point, I tried convincing myself I was overreacting, that it was just someone messing with the door and I was too tired to interpret things correctly. I took a deep breath and looked again to make sure I wasn't imagining it. When I pressed my eye to the peephole, my whole body froze. The door was still cracked open and the arm was still there, extended, but now it seemed slightly closer to my line of sight, as if it had shifted angle without me hearing or noticing any movement. I still couldn't see a face, shoulder, nothing from the body. Just the arm and the hand pushing. And one small detail I hadn't noticed earlier. The arm's shadow was cast on the carpet in the corridor. Clear, defined, and completely still. I couldn't stop staring at the shadow on the carpet. It was too sharp, as if the corridor light were hitting the arm directly. But I knew the corridor was almost completely dark, with only one lamp near the ice machine working, far from that spot. It didn't make sense. The shadow was there still, just like the arm, but the lighting didn't justify it. I touched my door handle instinctively, like it could give me some sense of security, and realized my hand was shaking. I kept trying to find a rational explanation. Maybe there was light coming from another angle. Maybe someone inside the room had turned a lamp on. But I saw no glow at all. The room was dark, except for that door slowly opening and closing. After a few more minutes of that rhythmic pushing, the sound stopped completely, so abruptly that I stepped back automatically. I waited about 10 seconds before checking the peephole again, and this time room 208's door was fully closed. No arm, no shadow, nothing. The silence scared me more than the noise. It felt heavy, like the air in the corridor had become thicker. I had no idea if the person, or whatever it was still standing there without touching the door. I sat on my bed but couldn't even lie down. I stayed sitting with the lights on, my heart pounding way too hard, until I finally realized I wouldn't be able to sleep like that. I waited a few minutes to gather courage before calling the front desk. The clerk sounded half asleep, but when I described what was happening, his tone changed immediately. He told me not to open the door under any circumstances and said he'd come up to check. While waiting, I listened for any noise in the corridor, but everything was absolutely still. The sound of my own breathing seemed too loud in the room. When I finally heard footsteps coming up the outdoor stairs, I felt a strange relief. I checked the peephole quickly before unlocking the door and saw the clerk standing there alone. I opened the door just enough to stick my head out and pointed at room 208, explaining what I had seen. He frowned and said that wasn't possible because 208 had been empty for weeks. He said it with a casualness that made me even more tense. He walked to the door and knocked a few times, as if to prove his point. No answer. When he used the master keycard, the door opened easily with no resistance. The room was dark, dusty, the bed unmade, as if no one had entered in a long time. The clerk turned on the light and showed that there was absolutely nothing. No luggage, no clothes, no sign of a guest. I stood at my own doorway. I didn't dare walk closer. The image of that arm at the door was still too vivid in my mind. The clerk realized how frightened I was and asked me to come down to the front desk with him. He said he wanted to show me something. I followed him down the stairs, trying not to look to either side of the corridor. When we reached the counter, he opened the drawer with the old camera system, the simple one that only records the main corridor. He rewound a few hours of footage until he found the approximate time when I heard the first pushes. The footage showed the corridor empty, dimly lit by flickering lamps. No sound, no movement. But when the clerk skipped forward to the exact time I had mentioned, room 208's door started opening and closing by itself. It wasn't slamming from the wind. The movement was slow, controlled, like someone pushing from inside. He looked at me, then back at the screen, clearly uneasy. Then he paused the footage and increased the brightness. That's when my legs almost gave out. Right on the carpet, exactly where I had seen it through the peephole, you could see the shadow of an arm cast onto the floor. It wasn't blurry or distorted. It was a sharp shadow, as if the arm were right there, standing against the door, but with no body to cast it. The clerk rewound and the shadow appeared again at every push, but there was never anyone in the corridor. He took a deep breath and said it might be best to move me to another room, or even for me to find another motel if I preferred. I just nodded, grabbed my things, and left, still trembling with the feeling that if I looked in the rearview mirror while driving, I'd see that same arm standing in some dark corner, motionless, just like it had been in the corridor. Story 4. I grew up in a small town in North Carolina, near a rural area where everything was woods, dirt roads, and houses spaced far apart. When this happened, I was about 16 and used to go to my best friend's house after school. We always headed back before dark, but that day I ended up staying longer because we were studying for a test, and I lost track of time. When I realized it was almost nightfall, I decided to walk home since the road was short and I had taken that path hundreds of times. The only annoying part was crossing an old wooden bridge that went over a wide creek. It wasn't dangerous. It just made a lot of noise whenever someone stepped on it. When I started crossing the bridge, the sky was already a dark orange and the wood creaked under my footsteps like it always did. I was halfway across when I heard a single sound behind me. One heavy, firm step like someone had put their full weight onto the planks. It was so clear that I stopped instantly. I looked over my shoulder expecting to see someone coming, but there was absolutely nothing. Just the empty bridge and the soft sound of water moving below. I stood there for a few seconds trying to figure out if I had imagined it, but the sound had been way too real. My heart started racing at the thought that someone might have been following me without me noticing when I first stepped onto the bridge. I tried not to panic and kept going, but this time much faster. The wood creaked under my feet and I listened closely for any unusual noise behind me. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe the bridge had shifted under my weight. Maybe some animal had moved beneath it, something like that. But when I was almost entering the last stretch, I heard the same kind of step again. Only this time it didn't come from behind me. It came from in front of me. The exact same sound and strong dry like someone had stomped right onto the planks. I stopped so abruptly I almost slipped. The problem was that the bridge was straight, and I could see the entire way to the other end. There was no one there, nothing that could have made that noise. I stood still for a few seconds, breathing too fast. This bridge didn't make that kind of sound on its own. I knew because I'd walked across it since I was a kid. The feeling I got was that someone was standing right at the edge of my line of sight, far enough that I couldn't see them, close enough to make that noise. I kept trying to convince myself it was just nerves from being alone at dusk, but something was really wrong. The last bit of daylight was fading, and the wood looked darker than usual. My whole body wanted to run, but my legs were so tense that for a moment I couldn't move at all. I took a deep breath and decided to cross quickly because standing in the middle wasn't helping. I started walking fast, almost running, and each step echoed way louder than I wanted it to. The bridge creaked like always, but I listened for anything that wasn't my footsteps. Every few meters I looked ahead and behind, expecting to see something. Someone walking, a board shifting, any sign that explained what I had heard. But the path stayed empty, completely still, with a light breeze hitting the sides of the bridge and making the wood vibrate in a way that just made me more anxious. A chill crawled up my back, like someone was there with me but invisible. When I was only a few steps from reaching the end, I heard the last step, this time much closer, like it had happened right beside me. It was so close that I turned my head instinctively, expecting to see someone, but there was nothing but the railing and the creek beneath. I didn't think about anything else. I ran. I burst off the bridge, almost tripping on the dirt road, and only after I got about 30 feet away did I finally look back. The bridge was still empty, unmoving. That's when I noticed something on the railing. Muddy handprints, as if large hands had been gripping it recently. The mud was still wet, dripping a little through the cracks in the wood. Those marks hadn't been there when I first crossed, and my heart started pounding all over again. I stepped closer, trying to understand what I was seeing. The prints were big, wider than my own hands, and they were positioned in a strange way, like whoever left them had been leaning forward with their full weight on the railing. I touched the mud lightly and felt it, still cold and fresh like it had been left there minutes earlier. That terrified me, because I knew exactly how long it had been since I'd crossed the bridge, and no one else had used that path besides me. I looked around for footprints on the ground, but the dirt was dry and hard with no marks except mine. The only evidence someone had been there were those handprints, facing the direction I had come from. I stood there trying to make sense of it. I thought maybe it was a hunter, some local walking through the area unnoticed, even a big animal somehow climbing onto the bridge when I wasn't looking, but nothing explained footsteps that clear, one behind me, one in front, and now those handprints exactly where I'd heard the last noise. The feeling that someone had watched me cross from start to finish hit me so hard it made my stomach twist. I decided to get out of there as fast as I could. On the way back to the main road, I looked behind me a few times, always expecting to see someone standing at the entrance of the bridge. But I saw nothing. Even so, I walked fast the rest of the way, with the constant feeling that at any moment I would hear another step on those planks behind me, as close as the last one. Story 5. My wife and I moved into an old 2-story house in rural Maine after months of searching for something within our budget. The place was simple, nothing really renovated, but it had a big backyard and was on a very quiet street. We were exhausted on moving day, setting boxes where they belonged and trying to get the basics organized so we could sleep. The attic was one of those parts of the house we decided to leave for later, since the realtor had already warned us that it was just a storage space, dusty, unused, and without any installed light. I went up there briefly during the day just to check the size, and I remember it being dark, stuffy, and with that feeling of a place that had been closed for years. The small window was almost opaque with grime. It was nearly midnight when we finally lay down to sleep. A little while later, my phone buzzed with a text from the neighbor next door. I assumed it was something about the noise from the move, but when I opened it, the message said, "Who's enjoying the view from your attic? The light's on and someone's standing at the window." I sat up immediately because that made no sense. There was no light bulb in the attic, and no one had gone up there since nightfall. My wife asked what was wrong, and when I showed her the message, she looked just as confused. The attic wasn't supposed to have light, and even if it did, no one could be standing in the window. The only things up there were old boxes and a floor covered in dust. The first thing I did was go to our bedroom window and look toward the attic. From where I stood, I could only see part of the roofline, but I didn't see any light from outside. Even so, the way the neighbor described it unsettled me. I trusted him. He was an older man who had lived there for years, not the type to make up something like that. My wife suggested maybe there was a reflection from the street, but the house was surrounded by trees and there was practically no street lighting on our end. The silence there had always been heavy, almost cold. And at that hour, it felt even more still than usual. We decided to go up together because neither of us wanted to go alone. I grabbed my phone to use as a flashlight, and we started climbing the narrow stairs to the attic. With each step, the air felt colder, like the place had been opened recently. When we reached the attic door, I noticed it was slightly ajar. That instantly sent a chill through me because I was absolutely certain I had left it completely shut earlier. I pushed it open slowly, and a wave of dusty old wood smell swept out. I shined my phone inside, and at first glance it looked the same as before. Stacks of boxes, old furniture covered with sheets, and a floor blanketed in dust. We stepped inside carefully, trying not to make the creaking floor any louder than it already was. The phone's flashlight didn't reach far, so I kept sweeping it from side to side to check every corner. When the beam finally hit the window, the one the neighbor said he'd seen someone standing in, both of our stomachs dropped. The glass was clean on the inside. Someone had wiped a clear streak through the grime so you could see straight out. I remembered perfectly that during the day the window had been completely opaque with dirt, impossible to see through. That didn't happen on its own. I walked closer, trying to understand what we were looking at, and that's when things got worse. On the floor, right in front of the window, were clear marks in the dust. Almost perfect footprints, like someone had slowly walked to that exact spot. 2 prints leading to the window and 2 coming back, forming a short trail, as if the person had stood at the glass for several minutes before walking away. What froze me completely was realizing that for someone to reach the window at that height, they'd have needed to climb onto something. But all the boxes were in the same place, untouched, no signs of shifting or being climbed on. Nothing had been moved. The footprints simply went to the window and back with no support whatsoever. We stood there staring at those marks, trying to find some logical explanation. I even considered that maybe someone from the rental company had been in there before we moved in, but that didn't make sense. Who would come in the middle of the night just to look out the window? On top of that, the door had been ajar, the dust disturbed, and the wiped clean streak on the glass looked fresh. My wife clutched my arm, saying she wanted to leave immediately. I did too, but I felt the need to shine the light around one more time, just to confirm no one was actually hiding in there. I swept the light quickly behind the boxes into the darker corners along the low ceiling. Nothing moved. Nothing was out of place except the footprints. But the air felt strange, colder than the rest of the house. When we got near the stairs, I noticed something else that made my skin crawl again. A faint drag mark in the dust, almost invisible, like something had been pulled across the floor but without leaving a clear shape. It was as if someone had walked with steps too soft to leave full prints, almost floating, but still disturbing the dust. It didn't make sense. It just felt wrong. We went downstairs quickly, and as soon as we reached the main floor, we locked the attic door. My wife was really shaken and sat on the couch trying to catch her breath. I still had my phone in hand when I decided to text the neighbor back, asking exactly what he had seen. He replied almost immediately, saying that from his house he could clearly see someone standing in the attic window, as if watching the street. He described the silhouette as unmoving, staying there for several minutes. When I asked if he'd noticed any details, he said he only saw the light and the figure, and that it was strange because that window had always looked dark and dirty. That only confirmed everything we had seen upstairs. At that point, the fear shifted into something else. The unsettling feeling of being watched from inside our own house. Even with all the doors locked, I couldn't stop thinking about those perfect footprints leading to and from the window. Nothing else in the house looked disturbed, but the thought of someone or something standing there in the dark, silently looking out the window with no lights on, was hard to shake. My wife and I agreed not to sleep in our bedroom that night. We grabbed blankets and stayed on the living room couch with the TV turned low just to break the heavy silence. We tried to nap, but any creak of the house or change in the sound of the wind outside made us sit up again. I think it was around 4 in the morning when I heard a very faint sound from above. A single quiet creak, almost imperceptible, but coming exactly from the attic's direction. My wife looked at me instantly with wide eyes, and I motioned for her to stay quiet. We froze, listening for it to happen again, but nothing followed. It was like the noise had been just a reminder that something was still up there, silent and unexplainable. When morning finally came, we got up slowly and went back to the attic to check in daylight. The door we'd locked was still shut, just as we left it. But when we opened it and climbed a few steps, we saw that the wiped clean streak on the window was still there, and the footprints in the dust as well. But now there was one more detail. Some of the prints looked fainter, as if someone had stepped there again after we'd gone downstairs the night before. They weren't full footprints, but the dust had been disturbed in a subtle, uneven way, like someone had stood there briefly before backing away. We didn't touch anything. We just closed the door and decided we would never use the attic for anything except keeping it shut. Story 6. I live in San Diego, and last summer I rented a vacation house in Palm Springs for 4 days, just to spend some time with my 8-year-old daughter after a few very stressful weeks at work. The house was simple, in a very quiet neighborhood, with those dry mountains in the background and a kind of silence I wasn't used to. The pool was empty because of maintenance, something the owner had already mentioned, so I didn't think much of it. My plan was just to relax, cook something light, and let my daughter play inside with the game she brought. The first day went by normally, and night fell quickly because we were tired from the drive. That night, after putting my daughter to bed, I stayed in the living room messing with my phone and watching TV. Around 11:30, I heard a noise coming from the backyard. It wasn't loud, just something dry, like a firm step hitting concrete. At first, I thought it was a branch falling or a small animal walking along the wall. But the sound repeated itself in the same way, with the same spacing, as if someone were walking slowly in circles. What made me uncomfortable was realizing that the echo seemed to come from a completely open spot, and the only concrete surface in the backyard was the bottom of the empty pool. I got up from the couch and went to the sliding glass door that faced the backyard. The porch light was on, but it was weak and yellowish, so the bottom of the pool was half in shadow. Even so, I could see no one was there. But the sound continued, that dry, dragging step like someone wearing hard-soled shoes on bare concrete. My first thought was that maybe it was some kind of animal, like a coyote or something, but it didn't make sense. The sound was too rhythmic, and it had the exact weight of a human foot hitting and stopping. I stood there staring at the big glass reflection of the pool, and for a second I had the impression of seeing a dark shape standing down there. It was just a reflection, but it sent a chill down my spine because it looked exactly like the silhouette of a person looking up. When I pulled the curtain aside to see better, the reflection vanished completely. The backyard was empty, nothing moving, like nothing had happened. But the sound stopped the exact moment the curtain moved, as if whoever was down there had noticed. I went back to the hallway without turning on any more lights, trying to listen for anything besides the hum of the AC. My daughter was asleep in her room and I didn't want to scare her, so I stood there for a few seconds trying to figure out if I had actually heard that, or if it was just in my head. The house was bigger and more open than what I was used to, and everything seemed to echo. But I knew the difference between echo and footsteps. And those had weight. They had direction. It sounded like someone was pacing in circles down there. I decided to check the guest room window, which had a different angle toward the pool. When I got close to the glass, I saw the backyard softly lit by the automatic lights, and everything looked normal. But as I leaned closer, I heard a single dry step from outside, as if it had landed right in the center of the empty pool. It was just one sound, but sharp, and the feeling that someone had just heard me made me step back immediately, like I had gotten too close. I stood in the middle of the room for a few seconds, heart pounding. It made no sense for someone to be out there, let alone inside an empty pool in the middle of the night. The house was in a quiet, gated community, and the back gate had been padlocked since we arrived. Still, the feeling that I wasn't alone in the backyard felt so real that I had to take a deep breath before checking again through a gap in the curtain. The pool area was completely empty, lit in that muffled way automatic lights do. Nothing moved. I was still trying to force my body to relax when something caught my eye in the window's reflection. It was quick, almost like a blur, but I saw the silhouette of someone standing in the pool again, motionless, staring directly toward the window. I immediately turned my head to check, but the pool was empty. No one there. Still, the image of that reflection stuck in my mind. That dark outline at the bottom of the empty pool, frozen as if waiting for me to react. I backed away slowly, with the feeling that if I approached the window again, I'd see something I really shouldn't. I couldn't sleep after that. I sat on the edge of the bed, listening to every creak of the house, trying to understand how that could have happened. I knew the pool had been empty for days, the owner told me. I also knew no one could have entered without going through the side gate, which made a very loud noise when opened. And yet, I had seen that reflection. I tried convincing myself it was just shadows and light, but the sense that someone had been out there stayed in my head, like that empty space was holding something I just couldn't see directly. Around 3 a.m, I got up to check on my daughter. She was sleeping deeply, completely unaware. When I went back to the living room, I walked past the window again, and even though I didn't want to look, my eyes automatically drifted toward the backyard. Nothing in the pool, but something made my stomach drop. A dark mark on the concrete near the deep end, as if someone had been standing there for a long time. That was when I realized it wasn't just imagination. Something physical had left a trace out there, even though I never managed to see anyone directly. I stared at that mark for a few seconds, trying to figure out if it was a shadow, dirt, or something I just wasn't recognizing. The problem was that the longer I looked, the more it really seemed like a footprint, the shape of a shoe or a boot. The outline was uneven, but clearly a sole. The pool was deep enough that no one could get in or out without making noise, and I hadn't heard anything at all. I closed the curtain slowly, not wanting to draw attention from anything, or anyone, that might be out there. My heart was beating so loud it felt like it echoed in my chest. I went back to bed, forcing myself to think logically, reminding myself the house was old and maybe the mark had always been there. But every time I tried rationalizing it, another thought pushed back. Someone had been there, standing in the empty pool, exactly where I'd seen the reflection. The idea of walking back to that window made my stomach tighten. I stayed in the bedroom, door slightly closed, listening for anything unusual. After some minutes trying to control my breathing, I started paying attention to the silence in the house. It was a heavy silence, the kind where any small noise feels too loud. The only sounds were the ceiling fan and occasionally the normal creaking of the structure. I kept telling myself it was all reflections, illusions from being tired. But the image of that figure standing in the pool kept coming back, like my brain was trying to make sense of a detail I had missed. It didn't make sense for someone to be there. The yard was enclosed and the gate would have made noise. I would have heard it. When I finally decided to get up and check if all the doors were locked, my body felt stiff. I walked slowly down the hall, feeling the cold floor under my feet. I went down a few steps and could see the sliding glass door to the backyard. It was exactly as I'd left it. Bar locked, curtain closed. Even so, the feeling of being watched returned every time I looked in its direction. I stood there trying to listen for anything outside. Nothing. Not a step, not leaves moving, not even wind. That kind of silence always makes me even more tense than noise. I went back to the bedroom slowly, not wanting to wake my daughter, but also not wanting to show how nervous I really was. When I lay down, my body was still tense, like I was ready to get up again at any moment. I stared at the ceiling, listening to her breathing beside me. Each tiny change in the house made my heart race. Even normal sounds like the wood settling seemed too loud. I kept repeating to myself that if someone had entered the backyard, there would be traces, noise, something. But the image of the still reflection at the bottom of the pool kept returning, and I couldn't find a simple explanation. When I finally dozed off, it felt like only a few minutes before daylight began to slip through the curtain. The initial relief didn't last long. As soon as I got up, I felt a strange tension in the air, like something in the house wasn't exactly the same as the night before. I went straight to the sliding glass door, hesitated for a moment, then opened the curtains. The backyard looked normal at first glance, but when my eyes went to the empty pool, my stomach tightened. On the concrete floor, leading toward the pool wall, were footprints, clearly human. And what unsettled me the most was that they stopped exactly at the wall, as if someone had stood there for a long time staring upward. Story 7. I've been living alone in Colorado Springs since last year, after my divorce. The house is simple in a very quiet neighborhood, the kind where people go out for walks at night and no one bothers locking their cars in the driveway. I work from home, so I spend a lot of time there, especially in the kitchen, which has a large glass door facing the backyard. At the far end of the lawn, I keep a plastic table and 4 chairs. I almost never use them. They just came with the house and stayed there. One of the chairs always sits tucked against the table, in the same spot. I know exactly where it stays because seeing the backyard is part of my routine every time I walk in to grab water or coffee. The night everything happened, I had gone to bed a little later than usual, around 2 in the morning. The wind was very weak, and the whole neighborhood felt dead. That typical silence we get around here. Before going upstairs, I passed through the kitchen to turn the light off and noticed something strange. The chair that always sat pushed up against the table was now in the middle of the lawn, turned toward the glass door. It wasn't subtle. It was positioned neatly, as if someone had placed it there on purpose. My first reaction was to think maybe some animal had pushed it, but the chair was way too heavy for that. The first thing I did was check the backyard cameras on my phone. I installed those simple motion-triggered cameras when I moved in, more out of habit than real need. I opened the history and rewound a few hours, expecting to see a neighbor messing around or maybe a large animal passing through. But none of that showed up. In fact, around 1:50 a.m., the chair started moving on its own. Not all at once. It slid a few centimeters, stopped, then moved again. Nothing was visible pushing or pulling it. It was just the chair changing positions as if someone were manipulating it from just outside the camera's field of view. I watched that playback 3 times, trying to spot any reflection or insect near the lens, anything that might explain it. Even trying to convince myself it could be a camera glitch or some weird wind issue, something didn't add up. The movement was too precise, always in the same direction. And what bothered me the most was that when the video reached the end, the chair was exactly where I'd seen it through the glass door, facing straight toward the kitchen. It looked like someone had placed it there to watch. I stood in the kitchen holding my phone, trying to decide if I should call the police or if I was just overreacting. In the end, I turned the light off and locked the glass door again, even though I knew it had already been locked. When I went to bed, I left the hallway light on, something I never do. I lay there listening for any louder noise, trying to convince myself everything had some obvious explanation. But around 3:20 a.m., when I heard a short, dry sound coming from the kitchen, like something tapping lightly against the glass. It wasn't loud, it didn't repeat, just one single tap that froze me in place. I held my breath for a few seconds, trying to tell whether I'd really heard it or if my mind was playing tricks. Then I got up slowly, without turning on the bedroom light, and walked toward the door to look down the hallway. When I got close enough to see the faint glow from the kitchen, I noticed the glass door was slightly open. Not much, maybe 2 fingers wide. I was absolutely certain I had locked it before going upstairs, because I tested the latch twice after watching the chair video. My heart started racing in a strange way, like my body was warning me to go back into the bedroom and shut the door. Even so, I crept forward on my toes and placed my hand on the handle, too afraid to look directly into the yard. It felt colder there, like the outside air was seeping in through the gap. I closed the door very slowly without making noise and locked it again. This time I pulled on it twice to make sure it was firmly shut. I stood there for a few seconds trying to listen for anything outside, but the backyard was completely silent. No wind, no animals, nothing. It was that strange, heavy silence, like the air itself was still. I thought about checking the camera again, but I was afraid I'd see the chair moved someplace else, or worse, see something moving near the door. Even so, I grabbed my phone and opened the app with shaking hands. The image took 2 or 3 seconds to load, which felt like forever. When it finally appeared, the chair was back near the table, exactly where I had put it earlier. For a moment, I thought the camera had frozen on an old recording, but I noticed the leaves moving on the trees in the background. It was the live feed. I kept staring at the screen, waiting for something to change, but nothing did. Still, I couldn't relax. The feeling that someone had been out there was too strong, and I couldn't stop thinking about the door actually having been opened. I ended up sleeping on the couch in the living room, half sitting up because I didn't have the courage to go back to my room. I left a dim light on and kept my phone in my hand, watching and re-watching the part of the video where the door appears partly open. I tried to find any detail that explained it, a shadow, a reflection, something human-shaped, but there was nothing. The more I watched, the more wrong everything felt in a way I couldn't explain. Sometime around 4 in the morning, I must have dozed off because I woke up to another dry tap hitting the glass door. I jumped off the couch immediately, heart pounding. The first thing I did was look at the door, but nothing was there. The curtain was slightly open so I could see the faint reflection of the kitchen on the glass. I stood perfectly still, not even breathing, staring at it, waiting for something to move outside. I didn't see anything move, but I noticed something that made my skin prickle. The lock was slightly lower than before, as if someone had tried to twist it. I remembered exactly how it had been positioned earlier because I had checked it myself. Now it was a few millimeters lower, just enough to look like someone had applied pressure, not enough to open it, but enough to shift it. I stood there for a long time trying to convince myself maybe I had left the lock like that without noticing. But it made no sense because I had checked twice before lying down. Even so, I forced myself to believe that explanation, because the alternative was thinking someone had really tried to open the door while I was sleeping just a few feet away. I turned the TV volume up, not because I wanted to watch anything, but because the silence was starting to make me even more anxious. Every tiny noise, the fridge motor, the wind on the roof, sounded much louder than it should. When daylight finally came, I felt huge relief and went straight to check the backyard through the kitchen window. The chair was still in the middle of the lawn, exactly as I'd seen on the camera, facing the glass door. Seeing it in daylight didn't make any of it less unsettling. I went outside with my phone in hand and walked the entire yard. The grass was damp and I saw some flattened areas, but it was hard to tell whether they were fresh or just weaker patches of lawn. Even so, looking at that chair sitting out of place facing the inside of my house, I felt the same uneasiness I'd felt during the night, like I had been watched for hours without knowing. I moved the chair back near the table, but this time I turned it toward the fence on purpose. It felt instinctive, like I was trying to break the image of it staring at the glass door. After that, I stood there for a few minutes looking around the whole yard, trying to find any logical explanation. My neighborhood is very calm, and the back fence is tall enough that no one could get in without making noise. There were no footprints or disturbed dirt near the door latch. There was no sign that anything had been forced, which only made the whole thing stranger, because the footage clearly showed the door moving. When I went back inside, I watched the footage again, frame by frame. The more I watched, the worse it got. The chair really did move, but always when the camera resolution dipped, like during the darkest parts of the night. It didn't slide in one continuous motion. It moved in tiny jumps, a centimeter at a time. And the worst part was that there was no shadow, no arm, no hand, nothing. Just the chair changing places slowly. At the end, when the glass door opens, the recording freezes for a second, and when it resumes, the lock is in the wrong position. That was when I realized the camera never actually captured the lock moving. After that, I started paying attention to the glass door in a way I never had before. The lock didn't look damaged, but it felt looser, like someone had tested its resistance several times. I ran my finger along the inside, trying to find any sign of force, but there was nothing. No scratch, no mark, not even pressure on the rubber seal. It felt like the door hadn't been opened with force at all, but pushed very slowly, millimeter by millimeter, until the latch gave way. Even so, I had never heard any sound during the night. When night came, I left several lights on and stayed in the kitchen longer than usual, checking the glass door every few minutes. I knew it sounded paranoid, but I couldn't ignore the fact that something had moved that chair. It wasn't the wind. The movement was too slow and always aimed at the door like it had a purpose. It couldn't have been an animal either. The weight and direction didn't make sense. Around midnight, I started feeling that same uneasiness as the night before, like the backyard was awake somehow, even though it was completely dark outside. I decided to check the cameras before trying to sleep. When I opened the camera app, I noticed the night vision was grainier than usual, like there was a faint interference in the air. It wasn't a signal drop, because the system reported no issues. The image just looked dirtier. Even so, I could clearly see the chair where I had left it, unmoving. I watched for a few minutes, waiting for any strange movement, but nothing happened. After a while, I locked my phone and exhaled slowly, trying to convince myself that maybe everything had been some bizarre glitch that wouldn't happen again. Around 2 in the morning, I was almost falling asleep on the couch when I heard a sharp crack coming from the kitchen. It wasn't loud, but it was the kind of sound that makes you open your eyes instantly. I froze for a few seconds, trying to figure out whether it was a wood snap, the fridge, or some normal late-night noise. The problem was, I'd been living there for months. I knew every sound this house made. That was not one of the usual sounds. I got up slowly, heart racing, and walked to the hallway that led to the kitchen, staring at the glass door without turning on any lights. When I got closer to the kitchen, I noticed the air was colder in that part of the house, like someone had left the door open for too long. But from where I stood, I could clearly see the glass door was closed. The backyard lights were still off, so everything outside looked way too dark, lit only by a faint glow from the street lamp. Even so, I could see the outline of the chair right in the middle of the lawn. That made my stomach tighten, because I distinctly remembered putting the chair back on the patio earlier. I stood there for a few seconds, trying to process it, feeling my heartbeat pounding in my ears. I grabbed my phone to check the cameras again, and when I opened the recording from the last hour, I saw that the chair had been moving slowly, almost imperceptibly, for several minutes, as if something were pushing it gently. There was no shadow, no arm, no figure, nothing. Just the chair inching forward a few centimeters with each frame change. I watched it with a knot in my chest, unable to find any reasonable explanation. When I reached the live feed, the camera showed the chair sitting exactly where I could see it through the door, but something in the porch camera made my blood run cold. The glass door appeared to be slightly open, maybe 2 fingers, even though from where I was standing, it looked shut. I moved closer to the door to check if it was just a weird camera reflection, and that's when I saw the upper latch was actually a bit out of place. Not enough for the door to swing open on its own, but enough to look like someone had forced a tiny gap and then stopped. I touched the door very gently, and it shifted a few millimeters, confirming it wasn't fully locked. A cold wave ran down my spine because I remembered the exact click it made earlier, when I locked it before sitting on the couch. I stared through the glass, trying to spot any movement outside, but the darkness was so deep I could only make out the lawn and the chair sitting in the middle of it. I didn't want to open the door at all, but I also couldn't bring myself to just turn around and ignore it. For some reason, I felt watched, not by the chair itself, but by the sense that someone might be standing just outside my line of sight. At the same time, the backyard was so silent that any step or breath would have been obvious, but there was nothing. I grabbed my phone with my right hand and, with my left, pushed the latch back into place until I heard the firm click. Before stepping away, I pressed my ear against the glass just to be sure there wasn't any sound out there. All I heard was my own heartbeat pounding too fast. I walked back into the house, trying not to think of the worst-case scenario, but something still bothered me. The feeling that the chair hadn't been moved from afar like some kind of camera glitch. I had watched the footage dozens of times, and the chair really did move toward the door in tiny increments. It wasn't the wind, it wasn't an animal, it wasn't a shadow. It was a continuous movement, like someone had been patiently pushing it for minutes straight without appearing in a single frame. I spent the rest of the night sitting on the couch with every light on, keeping my eyes on the glass door. The chair stayed in the same place until sunrise, which somehow made everything even more unsettling. As soon as the sun came up, I went outside to get the chair. On the way, I noticed something I hadn't seen the night before. The dew across the lawn was completely uniform, except for a faint trail where the chair had moved. It looked as if something had walked alongside it, leaving a thin, continuous line through the grass. I put the chair in the garage, locked everything again, and emailed the homeowner asking about the alarm system. I still don't have an explanation for what happened that night, but ever since then I've never left the glass door without the extra lock in place. Story 8. My wife and I were driving back home after visiting her family in rural Kansas. It was around 10:30 at night, on a back road we usually take to cut across toward our town. I was the one driving because she was tired, and the road was completely empty. Just that pitch-black kind of rural highway, with stretches of cornfields and a few scattered farms. I remember we were talking about random work stuff when I noticed far ahead of us, a car pulled over on the right shoulder. Nothing unusual, I thought. People pull over all the time when their engine acts up. But as we got closer, the car flashed its high beams once, a single sharp pulse like it was trying to get our attention. It wasn't a hazard blink, just one bright flicker. My wife even asked if we should stop, but I didn't see anyone outside the vehicle. No movement at all, so we kept going. About 10 minutes later, right at that long leftward curve in the road, I saw another car parked on the shoulder. This time, the driver's door was open, facing the road, tilted in a way that made it look like someone had left it in a hurry. The first thing that crossed my mind was, it can't be the same car. But as we drove past it slowly, we realized it was the exact same model, same color, same partial license plate, and again, no one outside. My wife tensed up and told me not to slow down too much, and I felt the same thing, that unsettling sense that something didn't add up. I kept my eyes on the mirrors for a few seconds, but I couldn't see if anyone was inside. Everything looked perfectly still and completely silent. When we reached the more illuminated stretch near the bigger farms, the tension eased a little, but I still had that thought stuck in my head. I know that route well, and there's no shortcut that would allow someone to leave the first spot and reach the second one so fast, especially without us seeing the car on the move. My wife stared at the side mirror for a while, almost like she expected someone to come running out of the dark. I tried rationalizing, saying they might just be two identical cars, but the high beam flash from the first and the open door on the second didn't feel like coincidences. The silence inside the car got so strange that I turned off the radio without even noticing I'd done it. When we finally got to town, we stopped at a gas station to use the restroom and breathe. That's when my wife remembered the dash cam. I hadn't even thought about it, but I agreed it was a good idea to check it, mostly to reassure myself that we were overreacting. We sat inside the car, watching the tiny screen as we replayed the first sighting. It looked exactly as we remembered, parked, flashing its high beam once, nobody around. Then we skipped ahead to the second spot where the door was open. But that part made us freeze. The footage clearly showed someone sitting in the driver's seat, but the person wasn't moving their head, wasn't leaning, nothing. They were just staring toward the road, completely motionless. What unnerved me the most was the fact that I had passed the second car slowly, and looking through the window, I swear I didn't see anyone inside. My wife even asked if I was sure because on the recording the person was perfectly visible. The face wasn't clear due to the lighting, but you could see the shape of the body, the shoulder, that stiff posture. We replayed the clip several times, trying to understand how I hadn't noticed it in real life. I even considered that maybe I glanced too quickly, or maybe the dashboard reflection got in the way. But none of it made sense. It was like that person only existed in the footage. When we moved a few seconds forward in the video, looking for the moment we fully passed the car, we noticed something else. The dash cam never recorded the car traveling between the first and second spots. There wasn't a single frame where the car appeared driving on the road, no headlights behind us. Nothing. It was as if the vehicle had simply appeared in the second location without ever passing by. My wife covered her mouth and I felt that sickening drop in my stomach. The kind you get when you realize something can't be explained logically. We sat there for a few minutes, staring at the frozen frame, not knowing what to think or say. We drove home much quieter than usual. I drove slowly through town, still processing what we had seen. The main road was calm, but every parked car seemed to catch my attention too easily. When we finally pulled into the garage, my wife insisted I close the door immediately, even before grabbing the bags from the back seat. It was like anything connected to that highway was stuck in our heads. We went upstairs, locked everything, and sat in the living room for a while without turning on the TV. We just tried to decide whether it had been some kind of prank or whether the driver needed help and we had misinterpreted everything. Later on, I tried rationalizing again. Maybe it was video lag or some recording glitch that created that ghost in the driver's seat. But the more I said it out loud, the less believable it sounded. The camera had never glitched before, and the footage of the first car was perfectly clean. Only the second one looked wrong. Not wrong like broken. Wrong like it showed something my eyes didn't see in the moment. My wife said she didn't want to take that road at night anymore, and I agreed immediately. We watched the footage several more times that night, each time feeling less certain about what we were actually seeing. In the end, the creepiest part wasn't even the figure in the driver's seat. It was the fact that the car appeared twice ahead of us without ever passing us. Later, while we were getting ready for bed, my wife told me she had checked the video one last time out of curiosity. She paused it at the exact moment we passed the second car, while the figure was still sitting in the driver's seat. Looking more closely, she noticed something we had completely missed. The side mirror on the car was slightly tilted upward, as if someone had struck it from inside. I rewound the clip a few times, and sure enough, it shifted by a few millimeters from one frame to the next. It wasn't a smooth adjustment. It looked like it had been pushed abruptly. Immediately, that same awful feeling I'd had on the road came back full force, like someone in that car had been watching us drive by and moved too fast for us to see in person. I saved the video after that, but I've never watched it again. The file is still on my computer, but just thinking about that motionless figure makes my skin crawl. The road is still there, and we still drive through that region during the day, but we avoid that route at night completely. Every time I go through that stretch, I check twice for any car stopped on the shoulder. To this day, we have no explanation for how that vehicle appeared in front of us twice without ever passing us. All I know is that the feeling of being watched during that second sighting wasn't paranoia. And every time I remember that open driver's door, I get the same tension I felt that night. Story 9. I used to work in a mid-sized office in Phoenix, Arizona, and that night I ended up staying later than usual because I needed to finish a report my supervisor wanted first thing in the morning. It was around 9:40 p.m. when I realized the entire floor had gone completely silent. Everyone had left at 7, and only the front desk security guard was still downstairs. My desk was near the end of the hallway, and from where I sat, I could see the storage room door a little farther ahead. They always kept that door closed because inside were boxes of paper, cleaning supplies, and some older stuff no one had touched in months. I was typing when I heard a strange noise, a quick scraping sound coming from that exact door. At first, I thought it might have been a box sliding inside or even a rat since the building was old. About 20 seconds later, the scraping came again, this time louder and shorter, like something was rushing against the surface. I stopped and stared at the door, trying to pinpoint the sound. The building was so quiet at that hour that any noise stood out, and this one was coming right from the bottom of the door. I pushed my chair back a bit and just watched. Then I saw a shadow pass across the bottom gap, a quick movement like someone shifting around inside but without any footsteps or voice. My stomach dropped instantly because I knew no one had gone in there all day. The door was always locked and the key was kept in administration, not with any of us. I stood frozen for a few seconds, trying to convince myself that it could have been some strange reflection from the emergency lights. But the shadow had been too well defined. I stood up slowly, making as little noise as possible, and started walking halfway down the hallway. With each step, I expected to hear someone moving boxes in there, but there was nothing except that heavy silence. When I got closer, the scraping returned, this time continuous, like something was trying to unlock the doorknob from the inside. The sound wasn't metal on metal. It sounded more like fingernails dragging against the door. My breathing sped up instantly because it was clear it wasn't a small animal. I stopped about 10 feet from the door and stared at the bottom gap again. Another shadow passed by, slower this time, like someone was standing there, breathing behind the wood. At that point, I started rationalizing in the most desperate way possible. Maybe someone had gotten trapped in there by accident, a maintenance worker or something. But that didn't explain the complete lack of footsteps or any voice. Even someone stuck inside would yell for help. I walked backwards toward my desk without turning my back to the door, grabbed my phone and called the security guard, telling him I thought someone had gotten into the storage room. He arrived in just over a minute and the sound had completely stopped, which somehow made everything worse, like whoever was inside realized I wasn't alone anymore. When the guard reached me, I was already standing in the middle of the hallway pointing toward the door. I explained what I'd heard, and he gave me that half-disbelieving look security guards always give, but he still pulled out his keyring. Before opening it, he knocked twice and called out, "Anyone in there?" The silence that followed was so absolute I could hear the faint hum of the air conditioner above us. He tried the handle, still locked as always, and started sorting through the keys. Meanwhile, I stood a few steps behind him, with this overwhelming feeling that something was about to happen. The hallway felt narrower, and I realized I'd been holding my breath without noticing. When he finally found the key, he turned the lock slowly. The click echoed down the hallway like it was louder than it should have been. He cracked the door open and switched on the light inside. As he pushed it fully open, we immediately saw that the room was in total disarray. Boxes that were always stacked neatly in the corner were moved around, forming a tight circle in the center of the room, like someone had cleared space to stand there. The floor had fresh drag marks everywhere. Something felt wrong right away. Everything was disturbed, but there was no sign of anyone. No sound, no movement, nothing. The guard stepped inside first, lifting his flashlight slightly like he expected someone to be hiding behind the boxes. I stayed at the doorway, scanning every corner. That's when I noticed the marks on the back wall. They were handprints, not dirty with soil or grease, but as if something sticky had been pressed multiple times, leaving distorted impressions climbing upward, like someone had used the wall to push themselves up. What bothered me most was the height. The mark started around chest level and went up over 7 feet. No one could reach that high without climbing onto something, but none of the boxes had been moved to allow that. Everything was disturbed only near the floor, except for the handprints. I called the guard over to look, and he stood there for a few seconds trying to make sense of it. He said maybe they were old marks, but I knew they weren't. I'd been inside that room before to get paper, and those prints weren't there. Besides, they were still shiny like they'd been made minutes earlier. The guard sighed and told me to wait outside while he did a full sweep, but even from where I stood, I could tell he was more rattled than he wanted to show. He checked behind the boxes, opened the small cabinet in the corner, even looked into the ventilation duct. He found nothing. The room was empty, but you could feel that someone had just been there. When he finished, he stepped out slowly, closed the door, and told me someone probably got in earlier and messed with the boxes, but that no one was there now. But when he said it, he avoided eye contact, like he knew the explanation didn't convince even himself. We walked together to the elevator, and while we were descending, I could still smell that faint scent of damp paper, like the air had been disturbed recently. I tried thinking of any employee who might have been stuck inside or any maintenance team working late, but none of it made sense. Administration always notified us when someone was scheduled to be on the floor, and I hadn't gotten any email. When we reached the lobby, the guard asked me to sign out and told me I shouldn't stay that late unless I had to. He tried to sound casual, but it felt more like a warning than advice. I walked to the parking lot with that intense feeling of being watched, even though the whole area was covered by cameras. Sitting in the driver's seat before starting the car, I stared at the rearview mirror for a long second, almost expecting to see a shadow move in the background, just like I'd seen under the door. I didn't see anything, but the feeling didn't fade. I drove off without looking back. When I got home, That unfinished feeling was still there. I opened my laptop and typed out an email to my supervisor explaining what had happened, but deleted it before sending. I knew I had nothing solid to report, just sounds, shadows, and marks on the wall. I replayed everything in my head over and over, trying to make a logical timeline, but nothing fit. There was no way someone could enter that room without a key, rearrange the boxes, leave those high handprints, and walk out without making a single sound. And that shadow under the door. Every time I remembered it sliding past, my chest tightened. The next day when I got to work, the storage room was locked as usual, but now there was a temporary sign taped to the door that said, "Maintenance, do not open." I discreetly asked the night guard if they'd found anything, but he just shook his head and said he couldn't comment. He looked tired, like he'd spent the whole night thinking about it too. Since then, I avoid staying late at the office. And every time I walk past that hallway and see that door, I remember the hurried scratching and the shadow standing still behind it, like something was trying to decide whether to come out or stay inside. Story 10. I had rented a small cabin in Vermont to spend a weekend alone, near a lake I had always wanted to visit. For months I had needed some time away from work, and the idea of staying in a simple place with silence and fresh air seemed perfect. The cabin was old, the kind with floors that creak when you walk, but it was clean and well kept. What caught my attention the most when I arrived were the outdoor steps, made of old wood already a bit warped. Each step creaked loudly, always in the same spot, which helped me know when I was going up or down. That night after dinner, I stayed on the couch reading for a while, with only a small lamp on. There was no strong wind, and the lake was so still that you could hear insects in the distant brush. Around 11:30, I closed my book and went to the sink to get some water. That was when I heard the first creak on the steps outside. It was a dry, single crack, exactly like when I had gone up earlier. At the time, I thought it might be some temperature change in the wood, something normal in old structures. I kept doing my things, but about a minute later I heard another crack, slightly louder, as if it came from the next step up. I stopped immediately. The cabin was small and I could pinpoint exactly where each sound came from. The feeling I had was that someone was climbing slowly, step by step, with a lot of weight because the floor in the living room even vibrated slightly. I stood in the middle of the room holding my glass of water tightly, trying to listen more carefully. I didn't hear footsteps on the porch, nor breathing, nor any sound coming from the woods. Only that second isolated crack, as if someone had stopped right where the step ended. I waited a few seconds before going to the side window, the only one with a partial view of the stairs. When I lifted the curtain a little, everything outside was completely dark. The tree line began about 10 meters from the porch, but I couldn't see any movement, no flashlight. Even so, while I looked, I felt that slight vibration on the floor again, very subtle, as if the weight of someone had shifted positions on the top step. I closed the curtain slowly, trying not to make any noise, and went to the front door to check if the lock was really in place. And it was. The metal was cold in my hand, which only made me more tense, as if I had just touched something that was being watched. I went back to the center of the room and tried to find a rational explanation. It could have been a large animal, maybe a deer passing very close, but the steps were too tall for an animal to step on them exactly like that. And what bothered me was the timing of the sound. It was always a single crack, then a long pause, then another crack higher up. It wasn't the kind of continuous noise wood makes on its own. After a few minutes without any more sounds, I tried to convince myself the wood had shifted because of moisture. Even so, I couldn't relax. I took my phone to check the time and saw that I had weak signal, but enough to turn on the flashlight. I thought about looking out the window again, but something in me told me not to get too close. I ended up going to the kitchen and sitting against the counter, listening to every little noise in the cabin. The silence was so deep that it felt like any minimal sound would be heard outside. The only constant noise came from the old refrigerator, which made a low hum. Suddenly, just as I began to breathe a little deeper, I heard another crack, now exactly on the last step, the one right in front of the door. The sound was dry and strong enough to make my heart race. I was far from the door, but the floor vibrated in that almost imperceptible way, as if someone had put their full weight on a single step. I stayed completely still, counting to 10 in my head, waiting for any other sound to follow, but nothing happened. No movement on the handle, no scraping of wood, no sign of breathing outside. Just that absolute silence that made me even more nervous. The only thing I could think was that if someone really was there, they were standing very close to the door, listening to the noises inside the cabin, just like I was listening to the noises on the porch. I sat there trying to decide whether I should call someone or simply wait until morning. I thought about calling the local police, but I felt ridiculous explaining that I was hearing creaking steps. Besides, the cabin was isolated, and I didn't know how long they would take to arrive. After a few minutes without new sounds, I gained enough courage to walk back to the side window. I lifted just a small bit of the curtain, enough to see the direction of the stairs. There was no silhouette, no movement, absolutely nothing. The darkness was so dense that it seemed to hide anything just a few meters away. Even so, that strange feeling, as if someone were standing right outside my field of vision, didn't go away. I decided then to stay as far from the door as possible. I took my water bottle and phone to the bedroom, which was at the back of the cabin. I closed the door, locked it, and sat on the bed with the lamp on. The sound of the forest felt more distant in there, but the floor still made those occasional creaks typical of old wood, and each one made me tense, even knowing they were normal. I forced myself to lie down, but I kept my ear trained, waiting for the creaking to return. Around 2 a.m, I heard one last crack, very light, almost imperceptible, coming from the direction of the front door. It wasn't a step this time, but it sounded like someone shifting their weight in the same spot. That last crack left me frozen in bed. I stared at the bedroom door as if expecting the handle to start turning at any moment, but nothing happened. The whole cabin stayed completely still afterward. I didn't know whether it was better to check or to stay quiet. I ended up choosing not to move. I kept the lamp on and sat with my back against the headboard, listening only to my breathing and the steady sound of the wind passing through the trees outside. After some time, the tension began giving way to a heavy exhaustion. I forced myself to close my eyes for a few minutes, but I kept waking up thinking I had heard footsteps outside when it was probably just the wood settling. When the sky finally started to lighten, I got out of bed with a sense of relief I can't explain. I unlocked the bedroom door and walked slowly into the living room. The cabin looked completely normal, but my heart was still racing. I looked through the glass door that faced the porch, and in the morning light I could clearly see the steps. That was when I noticed something that made everything fall apart again. There were 3 footprint marks on the 2nd, 3rd, and 4th steps. They weren't old marks. You could see the fresh mud, still somewhat dark, stuck to the wood. But what really disturbed me was that there were no marks before the 2nd step and none after the 4th. It was as if the person had stopped right in front of the door and stayed there for a long time. I stared at those marks for several minutes, trying to understand how someone could have gone up or down the stairs without leaving prints on the other steps. I went down to the porch and even touched the wood with my hand to see if it was wet or had any kind of residue that could explain this, but there was nothing. Just the 3 well-defined impressions, as if someone heavy had stayed there in the middle of the night. The door was exactly as I had left it, locked, with no signs of forced entry. I tried to look for footprints around, but the ground was untouched. The more I tried to find an explanation, the more I realized that any explanation sounded bad. I packed my things quickly and left the cabin before 8. On the road as I drove, I tried to convince myself that someone had passed by and walked off somewhere else, but nothing fit completely. I talked with the cabin owner by phone, and he said he had never seen anything like that happen, but he sounded genuinely concerned. Since that night, I can't hear the sound of creaking wood without remembering the vibration in the floor, as if someone were standing outside, waiting for something. I don't know who or what was on those steps, but I'm sure I wasn't as alone as I thought that weekend in Vermont.
Thank you for staying until the end of this video. It's amazing to have you here accompanying me until the end of the stories. If you liked it, leave your comment telling what was the story that moved you the most. And if you are not yet registered, sign up so you don't miss the next ones. Until next night of scary stories.